Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air for the third week of the new year, 2015. Our program is presented by members and friends of Aware, a local peace group. Aware is an acronym for Anti-War, Anti-Racism Effort. I'm Carl Estabrook. Aware was established 13 years ago after the 9/11 attacks by citizens of Champaign-Urbana who realized that the U.S. government would use those crimes to justify its already long-standing attempts to exercise military control over the Middle East. Mideast gas and oil are needed by America's economic rivals in Europe and Asia, and control of them gives the U.S. an advantage over China, Germany, and other countries, including Russia. Today, terrorism has become what communism once was for American presidents, an excuse to kill people in foreign wars that are really about the control of the world economy by the American rich, the 1%. Of course, there once were communists, as there now are terrorists. But that didn't justify our government's killing 4 million people in Vietnam, by far the greatest crime in international affairs since World War II. We as Americans should be concerned with how the government that supposedly represents us today uses terrorism as an excuse to enhance the profits of the 1%. It is working. 95% of income gains since the 2008 financial crisis have gone to that 1%, while wages have been flat or declining for most Americans. And the Obama administration has been able to carry on its wars while misleading and misdirecting the only enemy it really fears, the American public, who in fact suffer from increasing and accelerating inequality in this country. It's clear whom the Obama administration's war policy is working for. Politics in America is no longer a matter of liberalism and conservatism, but neoliberalism, which means enhancing the profits of the 1%, and neoconservatism, which means using foreign military action to do so. With few exceptions, both major parties are neoliberal and neoconservative, and President Obama is as well. One of the few major American politicians who is in fact opposed to American military intervention abroad, former Representative Ron Paul, has pointed out today how the new House Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy of California, says that the Charlie Hebdo killings in Paris justify U.S. intervention worldwide. And in fact, the U.S. intervention, that is war-making, continues. President Obama is the fourth president in a row to bomb Iraq. He has now attacked more countries, 8 of them, than the Bush-Cheney administration did. They only managed 6. The Obama administration, with the help of the media, tries to direct your attention away from their ongoing wars. We'll try to give a better account tonight, with commentaries by Ron Zoke, Clowning Around, Stuart Levy, the U.S. Army in Israel, David Johnson on world events, Karen Aram on the pivot to Asia, and I will be back with a comment on why Putin is looting like black folks in Ferguson. And we'll begin with Ron Zoke, Clowning Around.
Yes, well, I'm not wearing my silly hat today, but
we noticed.
Yeah, but what people can't see are my clown shoes.
We check. Look at this. We don't take this on faith. We're going to check.
I'm just kidding. Okay, reports in the Israeli press. Some gossip. President Hollande from France didn't want Netanyahu at the Paris rally. And there are further remarks from the Israeli slander machine that they tried to keep Netanyahu in the second row of the demonstrators there in the big demonstration a couple of days ago. The other remark is by Senator Cruz, who is attacking Barack Obama for not going there or not sending a highly placed representative to that demonstration. further complaints about Abbas, the Palestinian leader, being in the front row, and what a terrible deception that was, and so on. So on and on it goes. We're getting a lot of symbolism this week, or complaints about other people's symbolism. Charlie Hebdo is being condemned in some quarters and praised in others for making use of their supposed freedom of speech. It's a curious parallel in some minor respects to some American publications. One that I remember seeing years ago, The Realist, published by Paul Krasner, which was widely condemned and had endless trouble with censorship and legalities in this country. So it's something that we can't very well be self-righteous about, it seems to me. Does anyone remember The Realist? It's a very strange
Vividly.
publication. France has deployed 10,000 troops, supposedly, to protect sites that may possibly be subject to Arab terrorism. A number of other minor points here. It's 13 years since Gitmo, the American prison at Guantanamo, Cuba, has opened. 127 people remain there. 59 of them have been cleared, but the story is that we can't get any other country to accept them. And the administration is forbidden by Congress to bring any of them to the USA, which some say absolutely must be done if we ever hope to close down that prison at Guantanamo. So there's a big stalemate there. The administration is stymied on that point, and whether they will be kept there indefinitely remains open to question. Reporter James Risen will not be called to testify, apparently, in the suit against some other people who have published supposedly classified information. He was threatened with that for years, apparently, but they've relented, I think, because of the objection. And all of the talk about freedom of speech and of the press, which will be nullified if they went ahead with it. Curious statistics. Statistically speaking, you're more likely to be killed by a toddler with a gun that is found in your house or in your handbag or something than by a terrorist. You're 2,059 times more likely to commit suicide than to, with a gun, than to be attacked by terrorists. You're 9 times more likely to be shot and killed by the police than you are by a terrorist.
That's an underestimate.
Yeah. In the New York Times on January 11th, interesting piece online about why I won't serve Israel. All of the hundreds of dissenters who are refusing to serve in the Israeli army after seeing what the IDF has been up to. So there are certain classes of people that have long been exempt, all Palestinians, and the Haredi, the Hasidic ultra-Orthodox Jews that are being called leeches by other people in Israel because they are constantly subsidized by the government and never have to serve in the military. And there are certain other questionable cases, such as the Druze and so on. But interesting bit of social conflict there, which becomes acute at some times and becomes muffled at other times. Rudy Giuliani, former president of New York City, on December 21st, concerning the December 21st killing of 2 New York City policemen, he blamed it on Obama, who has been telling everyone to hate the police, according to Giuliani. That's a bald-faced lie. Finally, tonight, we'll be on the air after this has occurred, apparently, on Frontline, on WLL-TV, PBS. Will be a documentary, Putin's Way, described as an investigation into the accusations of criminality and corruption that have surrounded Vladimir Putin's reign in Russia. 9 o'clock tonight. Again, before you see this, unfortunately, but it will be rebroadcast a couple of times. So it sounds like more of the blatant propaganda against America's designated enemies that appear constantly on PBS. And apparently there's no limit on what can be said, slandering Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and Cuba, the designated enemies.
Venezuela.
Yeah, Venezuela should be included there also. So on and on it goes. Incredible political propaganda. And how do we identify what is and is not political propaganda? The only way many people seem to have is that whether they disagree with the content of it. And this is another symptom of people's tendency to think by association rather than by inference. They have no idea, apparently, what's a justified inference. And they're all of their thinking proceeds on the line of A reminds me of B. And this leads to a lot of mistakes in thinking, it seems to me, concerning symbolism and what message is being sent and all of that. And I just want to warn people against it and to clown around a bit more by saying that I reject it all. So stop there.
Thank you, Ron. And to hear more about what Ron rejects, hang around and we will talk about these things as the evening goes on. You're watching We're on the Air. We'll go now to Stuart Levy, who wants to talk about the U.S. Army in Israel.
Well, I wanted to read some of an article on kind of on the material underpinnings of Middle East conflicts, which we sort of know are there, and Carl every week tells us are there, but this is one of the times that the bones are really showing, I think. So this is from an article in the Middle East Eye by one Nafiz Ahmed, who says he's writing for himself, but he's talking about a U.S. Army report that was published in December, talking about the prospects of oil and gas extraction in the Middle East and how that plays into potential for regional conflicts, what the U.S. should do in order to support the people it likes and to get the arrangements that it likes. So, a new report by the U.S. Army War College's Strategic Studies Institute emphasizes the need for U.S. security and military support to its key allies in the Eastern Mediterranean, especially Israel, over access to recent vast discoveries of regional oil and gas. So, for example, in 2013, Israel granted oil exploration licenses in the Syrian-claimed Golan Heights, spilling potential for another armed conflict between the two parties should substantial hydrocarbon resources be discovered. And according to a report to the UN Security Council in early December, Israel has been in regular contact with Syrian rebels, including Islamic State fighters, raising the question of Israel's role in supporting anti-Assad extremists to cement its control of Golan's potential fossil fuel resources. The report also highlights the possibility of Israel piping gas to Turkey, where it can be exported to European markets, making Turkey a regional gas transshipment hub. So that would allow both Turkey and Europe to wean off their Russian gas dependence and integrate instead into a peaceful U.S.-Israeli dominated regional energy architecture. I mean, this should be of great concern for us. I mean, part of what remains of stability over Russia is that Europe needs them as a gas supplier, and this is directly saying it's a good idea to short circuit that. So a little more on the background. So since 2000, the Levant Basin, so spanning the offshore territories of Israel, Palestine, as in Gaza, Cyprus, Turkey, Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon, has been estimated to hold as much as 1.7 billion barrels of oil and up to 122 trillion cubic feet of gas. And since it's not fully explored, it may hold a good deal more than that. The Army report says of these discoveries that they're of tremendous economic and geostrategic significance, not just for its allies, but for the U.S. itself. Israel especially stands to gain considerably from their newly discovered gas wealth in terms of cost-effective energy for domestic consumption and revenues from gas exports. But these discoveries also raise the potential for conflict over these valuable resources, which seems like, putting it mildly. This relates directly to intractable border conflicts between Israel, the Palestinians. I mean, I would have thought that you could say that the main thing that Israel and the Palestinians were fighting over was land and water, access to arable land and water. But with this, the monetary stakes could be a good deal higher. There would be, many billions of dollars worth of oil and gas to fight over too, this is not an encouraging prospect. So to go on, Lebanon and Syria, as well as the unresolved Cypriot question between Greece and Turkey. So all of these conflicts are set to be fueled by this prospect of wealth. U.S. interests are to minimize the risk of conflict between its core allies while maximizing their capacity to exploit the resources. Let's see. The U.S. Army study highlights a real risk that tensions across flashpoints could escalate into a wider regional conflict. So in case of an armed conflict between Israel and Lebanon, the security of the wider Levant region could once again be at stake, with possible escalation of the conflict into neighboring Syria and the Palestinian territories, as well as, with historical precedents, Jordan and Egypt. The pre-existing political problems in all these countries, Syria in de facto civil war, Egypt in the midst of political instability, the potential for a new escalating regional war is a threatening scenario. So, to stave off this prospect, the U.S. report recommends that Israel and other Levant gas hubs like Lebanon and Cyprus play a key role in exporting Eastern Mediterranean gas to their Arab neighbors, such as Egypt. Egypt, Turkey, and Jordan, given that Middle East demand for gas is expected to rise dramatically in coming decades. I didn't know that. The report highlights the possibility of Israel piping gas to Turkey as a regional hub, as I mentioned before. This is interesting. As has been confirmed by the Quartet Middle East envoy Tony Blair's energy advisor, Ariel Ezrahi, Gaza's offshore gas resources are seen as a potential bridge to overcome popular Arab public opposition to gas deals with Israel. Israeli as well as Palestinian offshore hydrocarbon resources could play a significant role in facilitating mutual trust and willingness to cooperate. Well, that's maybe a hopeful way of putting it. But ultimately, installing such an architecture will require extensive U.S. intervention. U.S. diplomatic and military support have a pivotal role to play in the complex geopolitical landscape in the Eastern Mediterranean. U.S. support can form a potentially powerful element in the safeguarding of these long-term economic benefits at little cost in relative terms. If regional tensions escalate, the report warns that the U.S. also holds an important military position that could have an impact in securing the Eastern Mediterranean, including military training, equipment support to defend Cyprus and Israel from attacks on their energy infrastructure and gas developments. And the author, Nafis Ahmed, summarizes, this Orwellian document thus reveals that in the name of maintaining regional peace, a new great game is at play. To counter Russian and Chinese influence while cementing influence over its Arab allies, U.S. military strategists are contemplating the threat of war to redraw the Middle East's energy architecture around Israel. That's it.
Thank you, Stuart. You're watching Aware on the Air. We're talking about the machinations of our government particularly and the very real threat of war around the world. There's David Johnson on the subject.
Okay. Last week I had mentioned to you about a film that was playing at the Art Theater, Citizen 4. And I went and saw it last Wednesday, and it was a very cold night, like a minus 17. And I was really surprised that the theater was packed. It was probably 8 out of 10 seats were occupied. And the film itself was very good. Of course, the film Citizen 4 was the assumed name that the American patriot Edward Snowden took when he first contacted Laura Pointis, who is the filmmaker of this film, Citizen 4. Interesting about Laura Pointis is that she made 2 previous films, one called My Country, about Iraqis living under U.S. occupation, and then later a film about Guantanamo. And interesting enough, after the release of those 2 films and their awards that they had been nominated for, and the popular acclaim, that every time she came back into the United States, from traveling abroad, U.S. custom agents would detain her and question her for hours on end. Obvious harassment. So I guess that's why Edward Snowden had decided to contact her. So the film basically takes place, most of it is filmed in Hong Kong, actually, in Edward Snowden's hotel room right after he left the United States, but before he made any of his disclosures public. And Glenn Greenwald is also in the film, the constitutional lawyer and journalist who lives in Brazil. Also went there, as well as a reporter from the Guardian newspaper of London. Was really interesting because the film actually, as it was being filmed, it started before Edward Snowden's revelations and continued to film after he made 2 public revelations. It's really interesting to see this interview with Edward Snowden. I mean, the guy is at the time was 29 years old, and he had one of the highest security clearances you can imagine. Very well-paying job. What's interesting that he worked for a private contractor, even though, and the fact that he had the highest security clearances imaginable, more so than most people who work directly for the CIA or the NSA in whatever capacity. But he mentioned the reason he did this, which basically meant losing his job and having to leave the United States, and who knows what from there as far as how his life would be. He said he just could not live with himself continuing his job without letting the American people know what was going on, as far as the lengths that our own government has gone to basically spy on all of us. Everything, our emails, our cell phone conversations, everything imaginable, and that this was not justified. And what's interesting, in the film, there's also a previous NSA whistleblower, Edward Biney, who had tried to go through official channels to reveal misdeeds and illegality by the NSA. When he tried to go through the proper channels to try to correct things, he was ultimately targeted. SWAT team, FBI SWAT team, broke into his house while he was in the shower, dragged him out of his shower naked. He's missing a leg. He's a partial amputee. The man's like in his 60s. But anyway, this was also a reason why Edward Snowden said that he decided that he had to do it the way he did, because previous whistleblowers, and there's been many, when they've tried to do the right thing, try to go through the proper channels, they've been either lost their jobs and or faced criminal prosecution. Anyway, so what's interesting about this is that when we go to more recent events here with the attacks in Paris, it's really, these acts are, of course, heinous crimes, and they should be looked at that. And this whole attempt that you see by especially the United States, but also some of the other Western powers, to try to use this as an excuse to basically demonize anybody who is either an Arab or a Muslim, and to justify, to further expand spying on its citizens is just, it's almost as horrific as a crime itself. A little interesting tidbit, one of the policemen killed in that attack, as well as an employee of the supermarket, the kosher supermarket, that was also attacked, who protected some of the customers from being killed. Both of them happened to be Muslims. So, I mean, we have to realize this. We have to realize what's going on here. you cannot generalize against a whole group of people on their ethnicity or their religion. After this attack, various Muslim organizations and mosques came out and condemned it in no uncertain terms. But it's interesting too that the media hasn't been reporting about all the attacks on mosques in France and elsewhere after this attack. And it's just, we need to realize that all this that's happening, this whole phony war of terror, I don't want to call it a war on terror because frankly it's a war of terror, we have to realize what it's all about. Islamic extremism is just as bad as Christian extremism or Jewish extremism or Hindu extremism. We have to remember that this is being used as a ploy to make us afraid, very afraid. The whole purpose of this whole demonization of Islamic people and Arabs is to have an excuse to basically go in, and as others have reported today and countless other times on News from Neptune, to basically steal the energy resources of various countries for the benefit of not the American people, but the wealthy 1%. It's what's also interesting is the fact that all this Islamic phobia, if you will, is, and the problem of terrorism that is committed by Islamic groups is that this just didn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, when they try to use this propaganda, of course, they try to act like this just happened all of a sudden out of nowhere. They're acting like this happened just in a vacuum, and we have to realize that Islamic extremism was almost non-existent. It was non-existent for all practical purposes prior to the late 1970s. So how is it that this developed? I mean, you have to go back and look at what our government has done in the past, what the French government has done in the past, what the British government has done in the past in various countries in the Middle East as well as Africa and Asia. The old colonialism. Now it's neocolonialism, which is the policy of neoliberalism, which is to basically steal a country's resources and impoverish its people for the benefit of the wealthy, not just the United States, primarily in the United States, but also for the wealthy elites of Britain, France, et cetera. So we have to realize this. We have to keep this in mind. Let's not be fooled by this continued hate-mongering and propaganda.
Thank you very much, David. This is all unfortunately true. You're watching Aware on the Air, and we'll go to Karen Aram and pivot to Asia.
Well, yes, several things here I want to comment on. First, I want to correct, I hope I don't come in here every week and have to correct something I said last week, but again, I'm doing it. I was referring to Fareed Zakaria making erroneous statements on Channel 3. And I reviewed that, and I'm like, Channel 3, I have no idea what or where Channel 3 is. He's on CNN, okay? So I'm just pointing out that that was incorrect, and I don't know where it came from.
He probably plagiarized it from something on some channel.
I have
right?
no idea. But maybe I shouldn't review our shows. I don't know.
Do you mean the statements were incorrect, but they were just broadcast in a different medium?
No, I said Channel 3, which is ridiculous. It's CNN and most people. And I'm not recommending CNN, but he's on there and he makes a lot of erroneous statements. Yeah, and it was referring to an erroneous statement he made previously, but we won't go into that now. Another thing, on the pivot to Asia, last week I talked about Sri Lanka and the upcoming election and how the U.S. was betting on the they don't refer to him as the common man, but he was their candidate, our candidate. And a lot of human rights abuses under the current or former leader, Rajapaksa, and ignoring the fact that Sirisena, who was our man that we were supporting, at one time did work for, was head of the Defense Department there. So a lot of, there was a lot of, I talked a lot about that. Now, as of the 8th, the election took place, and Sirisena did win. And I did discuss this also on News from Neptune, our program on Friday. Now, yesterday morning, the New York Times had an article on the Sri Lankan election. And the first paragraph I found rather irritating because they referred to Sirisena as this unknown. And I thought, well, he was hardly unknown. Okay, he was part of the same government that would be held responsible for human rights abuses if if they ever did come to the UN Council on Council on Human Rights. However, I do have some thoughts on the election. Since I really don't know very much about Sri Lanka or the politics there, I did notice that they said there was like an 87% turnout, and that a lot of the people voted in this rather unknown, as they referred to him, as opposed to Rajapaksa, because they felt that Rajapaksa was becoming too strong in his presidential position, but because they do not want a monarchy, and he was acting like a monarch. And so I looked at that and I thought, well, you know, maybe there's something to that then. Perhaps this will be progressive. I mean, we know that it's because, we can't say completely because the U.S. was supporting Sirisena. We know that the U.S.'s goal is to have more control over Sri Lanka and other nations in the region, as opposed to China. And one of the reasons they did not want Rajapaksa in power again was because Rajapaksa was looking at firming up relations with China. Now, they've had firm relations with China, who has been supporting them financially and with weapons, etc. Well, our goal right now is to isolate China from allies as much as possible in Asia. But even looking at that, I thought to myself, let's see what happens. I think Sri Lanka is very worthwhile to watch. Maybe something positive will actually come out of this regime change, which did take place at the ballot box. And with an 87% voter turnout, don't we wish we had something like that here? I think the highest voter turnout we've had in the U.S., and I'm talking primarily a presidential election, it was like 65%, and that was in '76. So I think I'm going to back up a little bit and give Sri Lanka a chance, give the U.S. influence on Sri Lanka a chance, and see what transpires. So it's unusual for me to be positive about the U.S. when I'm on here, but that is one thing. I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, my comments on some of what Ron was talking about, Guantanamo, I'm wondering, what if we just return Guantanamo to Cuba? I'll bet
We
Cuba,
stole it fair and square, right?
yeah, I'll bet Cuba would have no problem deciding what to do with the prisoners that are there. I have a feeling, I just keep thinking that would be the most humanitarian way to deal with it. Okay, police in Paris, you were talking about them. Both Ron and David were talking about the police in Paris, and I want to point out that this morning's news on CNN, they showed I didn't get the number, but anywhere from 6 to 8 at least, of New York Police Department officers were in Paris, lending their support to the whole anti-terrorist movement, because of course New York has the same concerns. And all I wanted to ask myself was, I wonder if they flew over there at taxpayers' expense. I think the taxpayers should be concerned about what our policemen are doing. On the other hand, we know that the U.S. has brought in Israeli trainers to train police departments across the nation. So I don't know if that's any less expensive, but I would tend to think so. Another comment I have to make would be, Stuart, in respect to Israel's support. It's interesting what you have discussed here, and I think it's very important and of great concern. I mean, we have Islamophobia across the globe right now, rampant across the globe. We also have anti-Semitism rampant throughout Eastern Europe. And I mean, we are looking at, with NATO on the borders of Russia, I mean, we are really looking at very serious situations today. Now, I have seen postings on Facebook from individuals who keep claiming that ISIS is supported by Israel and that the IDF or the Mossad has been involved in a lot of the terrorist attacks. And I kind of back away because I'm kind of taking the attitude, well, let's hold off until we have some real proof there. But some of what you were talking about, Israel having supported ISIS, I'm just wondering if maybe there isn't something to that. I don't know if you want to comment on that further or not, but anyway, I just brought that up. The only other thing I have to say is that, okay, there is a lot of material out there. A lot of people don't realize. This past week on the Charlie issue, I mean, I've lost some Facebook friends over that, but I'm like, hey, that's fine, because I refuse to accept Charlie as a hero for freedom of speech. Anybody who reads Noam Chomsky, anyone who reads, I mean, Counterpunch has had such good in-depth articles recently, but anybody who reads Chris Hedges, I mean, they've all written such excellent articles, but one on Counterpunch that I especially liked was by Andrei Vilcek, who is an author that he's a journalist and an author that I have referred to in the past. I highly respect. And I'm going to read just 2 paragraphs out of his article here. And one is that he talks about, he goes into great depth, it's pages here, about Islam. And he said, you know, it's not only a religion, it's also an enormous culture. It's one of the greatest on earth, which has enriched our humanity with some of the paramount scientific and architectural achievements and with countless discoveries in the field of medicine. Muslims have written stunning poetry and composed beautiful music, but above all, they developed some of the earliest social structures in the world, including enormous public hospitals and the first universities on earth. And he said, almost all radical movements in today's Islam, anywhere in the world, are tied to Wahhabism. That's an ultra-conservative reactionary sect of Islam, which is in control of the political life of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other staunch allies of the West in the Gulf. Now, I took some heat because I mentioned something about Wahhabism in reference to a young man who is a young blogger in Saudi Arabia who is serving time in prison. I think he's been, I forget how many years, maybe just a year, but he's also undergoing whiplashing almost daily or weekly. I mean, it's really horrific just for speaking out against the government. And I want to point out that it's not about religion. It's about the way monarchies and the way governments utilize specific religions. And in this case, they are utilizing, and Andre really goes into this in quite a bit of depth here, but the point is that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other staunch allies of the West in the Gulf are utilizing this. Now, that's not to say that all people who practice Wahhabism are this, but we know that ISIS has been influenced as well by this. So I think it's important to see the parallels and the usages, just as one would say, okay, we can't blame right-wing conservative Christian movements. Certainly the blowing up of the FBI building, was it in Oklahoma, by one man? Well, he was a right-wing evangelical Christian. And I have to admit, I was living out of the country at the time, and I developed some very, you know, a great deal of concern over what I saw as you know, right-wing evangelicals. But as you pointed out here on the show one time, well, actually, you know, Martin Luther King was an evangelical. So I have to be very careful not to label or not to put this label on everything and everyone who follows a particular religion. And I have to admit, I had friends and missionaries that I knew abroad who were, they were conservative evangelicals, but they certainly would never support violence or killing or even anti-religion or discrimination against others. So I think it's important to recognize that none of this is ever about the religion. It's people are influenced by various things, and right now the U.S. and a lot of people here, as well as in Europe, are being highly influenced by the media, the corporate-owned media, which when you mentioned Frontline, Ron, I thought, well, that's one of the reasons I stay away from the corporate-owned media. I do view CNN to see what they're saying in contrast to what I get from Democracy Now! And from, which is the only solid news, I believe, on TV, which is promoted here on this station. And you do get some things from RT, there's no question. I read RT and I listen to Crosstalk and I favor that station as well.
What about Fox News?
You know, I've never watched Fox News. I wouldn't even know how to find it on my TV station. I mean, I don't
Want a
even
little
know where
fun in
it's.
your life, Karen? Come on.
No, I don't even know where it's located.
Sit in a waiting room and it will come to you.
Maybe, okay, well, you know, that could be. I usually I plug my ears when I'm in waiting rooms because I usually try
More
to
research
read.
has appeared showing that those who watch Fox News the most are the most ignorant and deluded people who get their news from television.
Did you hear that
Good.
on Fox News?
Good. It's good to know. Since I've never watched Fox News, that means I could be deluded.
But you
from
know, over the
ignorant,
years,
deluded.
unfortunately, PBS, it used to be really great.
Right,
and
right.
because of its corporate funding, has become sort of the Fox News of the intelligentsia. I'm sorry to say.
Well, BBC years ago when in Asia, people, a lot of the political activists in the jungles, they knew to eschew Voice of America, okay? But they would listen to BBC. So I took up, and if you had shortwave radio, which most of us had in our homes as well, because you never knew when there was going to be a blackout or a coup or a revolution, so we would listen to the BBC. We got better information, and so we really revered the BBC. And when I would be traveling internationally, I would often watch BBC. In my home or my apartment, CNN would be the best ongoing, but still in all, we had respect for them. But now, the articles that I've been seeing and reading on BBC, it's obvious the government has so slanted it. Or is it because Rupert Murdoch bought them up? I don't know.
Thank you, Karen. Here are two notes from the week's news, the foreign press, of course. The U.S. Quietly announced that it is boosting its European military contingent, that is, American military in Europe, by 3,000 troops, including 150 tanks. Hey, look, I mean, military situation in Europe, we got to send troops, right? A conservative newspaper in Britain published an accurate article about how the Western media says that a xenophobic, that is to say racist, anti-Putin figure in Moscow is a moral giant. This is Alexei Navalny, who has been cried up as an alternative to Putin by the Western press, and even the conservatives in Britain recognize the guy's a racist. Washington's plan to push down oil prices to hurt the Russian economy might have made sense on a short-term basis, sense in the, that it might have its desired effect to shock Putin into playing ball with Washington. But as a long-term strategy, it's becoming increasingly clear that it's nuts. And what's even crazier is that Obama has decided to double down on the same wacky plan, even though Putin hasn't given an inch. That is, he's not being brought to heel as Washington wants. There are a number of reasons why Washington wants to get rid of Putin. The first of which is that the Russian president has become an obstacle to U.S. plans to pivot to Asia. That's the main issue. As long as Putin is calling the shots, there's going to be a growing resistance to NATO's push eastward and Washington's military expansion across Central Asia, which could undermine U.S. plans to encircle China and remain the world's only superpower as the Chinese economy grows. Under Obama's pivot to Asia, the Pacific Command, that is the American military organization in the Far East, the Pacific Command will account for more than 60% of all American military forces, up from a mere 50% under the Bush administration. This includes new U.S. basing arrangements in the Philippines, Singapore, and Australia, one of the reasons Sri Lanka and the other Asian dependencies are interesting, as well as renewed close military ties to New Zealand, an ongoing U.S. military exercise in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Taiwan, as well as large troop deployments in Japan and South Korea, including nuclear-armed units. If you haven't heard, the Obama administration is modernizing America's nuclear fighting forces, which means more, better, and in more places. Second, Putin has made himself a general nuisance vis-a-vis U.S. strategic objectives in Syria, Iran, and Ukraine. In Syria, Putin has thrown his support behind President Assad, who the U.S. wants to topple in order to redraw the map of the Middle East and build gas lines from Qatar to Turkey to access the lucrative EU market. We heard some about some of this earlier. Third, Putin has strengthened a number of coalitions and alliances, the BRICS Bank, the Eurasian Economic Union, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all of which pose a challenge to U.S. dominance in the region, as well as a viable alternative to neoliberal financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. Finally, Putin is doing whatever he can to circumvent dollar-denominated business and financial transactions. The move away from the buck is a direct attack on the U.S. greatest source of power, the ability to control the de facto international currency and to require that other nations stockpile dollars for their energy purchases, which are then recycled into U.S. financial assets, stocks, bonds, and U.S. treasuries. The petrodollar recycling scam allows the U.S. to run gigantic current account deficits without raising interest rates or reducing government spending. Putin's anti-dollar policies could diminish the greenback's role as a reserve currency and put an end to a system that institutionalizes looting. This is why Putin is public enemy number one. It's because he's blocking the U.S. pivot to Asia, strengthening anti-Washington coalitions, sabotaging U.S. foreign policy objectives in the Middle East, creating institutions that rival the IMF and the World Bank, the so-called Washington Consensus, transacting massive energy deals with critical U.S. allies, increasing membership in an integrated single-market Eurasian Economic Union, and attacking the structural foundation upon which the entire U.S. empire rests, the dollar. And the Obama administration is using its favorite method, killing people, in this case in Ukraine, as many people have died in eastern Ukraine by the proxy government that the U.S. put there is making war. And it's willing to risk nuclear war. The Obama administration is willing to risk even nuclear war to save its profits. It is not a pretty picture. And of course, the most remarkable thing about the whole business is that what we hear in the American media is that Putin is trying to reconstitute the Soviet Union, and therefore he has to be stopped by American military and economic power. Ron referred to this earlier. And it seems to me that there is a certain symmetry here to the notion that, well, yes, there have been an awful lot of police killings of unarmed people here, but in Ferguson, those demonstrators were looting. Right?
Yeah.
You're listening to Aware on the Air. We've got a few minutes left to go around for comments on things that have been said so far. Ron, you want to start?
Sure. Stuart, for clarification, you were not talking about gas merely in the Golan, but there are underwater hydrocarbon resources at the eastern end of the Mediterranean.
Yes, right. They opened by talking about the whole Levant basin. So yes, absolutely.
Particularly
it's much more than the Golan. Much more than the Golan
just off
Heights,
Gaza,
but that's
right.
okay. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. David, talking about Snowden, the current line on Salida is, why can't we put it behind us and forget all that old bad stuff? So, yeah, why can't you just let bygones be bygones?
Well, because nothing's been changed. The situation that Snowden was talking about is still here, and in fact is being increased exponentially. As I said, because of these the Charlie Hebdo killings and stuff. I mean, just gives more of an excuse to. What's interesting about those killings is that was pointed out on Abby Martin's Breaking the Set, which is not broadcast on RT television, is that maybe because they've been so busy spying on all of us, that maybe that's why they missed valuable, communications that may have stopped could have stopped this terrorist attack in Paris if they'd just been focusing on people that have been known to, be associated with violent extremist groups.
Yeah.
I thought that was a very good point.
Karen, do you see the police emerging as a independent pressure group, independent of government control?
Where?
Where not?
Oh, in New York City.
Yes.
Oh, I have no idea.
I think there's a good deal of merit to that view.
Not
They
just in
are
New York.
Oh.
starting to constitute a new state within a state, in New York City especially,
Okay.
and there's the same tendency in other places. So,
Not too far from where we sit.
yeah. So, can this be kept under control? Can police be kept under civilian control? It's looking more and more dubious.
Or put under, well,
Well, it depends on which civilians, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, which civilians, exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
thank you, Ron.
let's see.
Comments, Stuart? You have
Stuart.
comments or
Yeah,
questions?
I guess I could maybe a couple things. I also saw the Citizen 4 and was very much struck by one of Snowden's comments saying all it would take is for the policy switches to be changed, by some future government, and it would become essentially impossible to resist that government. I mean, that's one of the most striking lines in the whole thing.
Yes.
You know, he's not necessarily saying we're living in a pervasive police state, but we easily could, and we would have no way out. And that's what he wants people to know. That's why he's giving up his life to do this. As to the question of, you know, does it make sense for the attack on Charlie Hebdo to be a false flag attack? It certainly isn't necessary. Juan Cole has I think a pretty good article called "Sharpening Contradictions," and a bit from that. He says, Al-Qaeda wants to mentally colonize French Muslims, but it faces a wall of disinterest. You know, most Muslims are not interested in becoming radicalized in France or here or elsewhere. But if it can get non-Muslim French to be beastly to ethnic Muslims on the grounds that they are Muslim, then it can start creating a common political identity based around grievance against discrimination. So in this way, the reactionary Islamic militants are of a piece with the right wing people that they're trying to, the Islamophobes and the Islamic militants need each other.
Right.
Is what he's arguing.
Exactly.
And that this is a piece of that. And that what's most important, I mean, Juan Cole suggests that a good model to follow is the response, the Norwegian response to Breivik's massacre of a lot of Muslim children, where he's treated as a gross common criminal and not as a member of a group. That's how, that's an escape from this is a matter of, this is what Muslims do, which is what a lot of people are pushing. We need to recognize the effects of people pushing that line.
Well, exactly. And I think that's what we see happening. We see that these people are not being treated like common criminals. We see that they're being treated as terrorists, and we see this whole anti-terrorism movement
and
taking
as
place.
members of a class, not as
of a group, exactly.
Well, again, symbolism rather than the
Substance, yeah.
basic physical facts. But.
Yeah.
Right, and it's frightening.
Thank you, Stuart. Comments on what you've heard, David?
Yes, I mean, it's interesting, Stuart, in your report about the Israeli intelligence agencies being in contact with ISIS. I mean, I remember seeing some of this back during the summer, and frankly, I was a little skeptical. I don't, let's put it this way, some people, when they hear something like this, depending on the source, and that's a very important criteria, is depending on the source, automatically think, oh, that's conspiracy theory. Well, a lot of times things that people have labeled conspiracy theories turn out to be actually factual, and this is, I think, a good case in point. There was something else I was going to ask Karen, and I'm sorry, but it slipped my mind.
Okay.
I think about maybe before the show.
Well, let me make one point here.
Yes.
I'm predicting that you're going to see a very strong movement in southern Thailand in the future in order to control a Muslim terrorist event. And that will be done because they have to justify all of the military equipment and weapons that they're buying from the U.S. And I have predicted all along that one of the reasons the U.S. is so concerned with the military propping them up, okay, which I believe they do. I don't believe that China's propping up anybody there. China's just trying to do business with whoever's in power. But the U.S. had a reason, and their goal is to bring back their military bases to Thailand. Remember, they had to pull them out back in the 76, I think, they had to withdraw. So they want back in that area.
What was the reason they had to withdraw the U.S. military bases?
Well, at that time, the student protest who were then labeled and slaughtered or incarcerated because they were socialists, were saying, get your bases out of here, because Vietnam, I mean, that was after the fall of Vietnam. It put Thailand in a very precarious situation. And the U.S. didn't like that, but they removed all their military bases. So what they do is they have all of these joint, what do you call, joint operations that they do. I mean, they have a constant presence there in Thailand, but they've been selling weapons and military arsenal. So I see a movement now. You're going to hear a lot about, what they call the Muslim separatists, meaning those who would like to be part of Muslim Malaysia in southern Thailand. They'll need an excuse.
It's interesting to watch what goes on in France these days. So there's a lot of self-congratulation because Charlie Hebdo published a racist caricature of Muslims. Do they also publish Nazi caricatures of Jews? If they did that, they'd be in jail.
Right.
So this is all complete fakery and fraud. And the march in Paris that Ron described included one Frenchman, I've seen a picture, carrying a sign saying, "I'm marching, but I'm conscious of the confusion and hypocrisy of the situation." That's what it says in French. Maybe it sounds better in French, I don't know. I think we should remember that Yemen should have sent the Yemeni journalist Abulay Haider Shayeh as their representative. He, of course, was in prison for years on the direct orders of President Obama for having reported on secret U.S. strikes in Yemen that killed scores of civilians. Obama's drone strikes. He revealed them, and Obama personally insisted that the president of Yemen imprison him. Or Sudan should have sent Sami al-Hajj, the Al Jazeera cameraman who was held for 6 years without charge in Guantanamo and repeatedly interrogated by U.S. operatives who were intent on proving that Al Jazeera had some sort of link to al-Qaeda. So you know, while there's much to take heart in terms of this huge outpouring of support for freedom of the press, hypocrisy was on full display in the streets of Paris when it came to the world leaders. And it didn't stop with Bibi, although he did a pretty good job of hypocrisy himself. You've been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, in the third week of the new year, 2015. Our show is produced and directed by Jason Liggett, thanks to whom also this program and others like it will be available on YouTube. And see our Facebook page for Aware for articles referred to by the panel. Stuart, you want to talk about one upcoming event?
There's an upcoming event.
Short on time, go ahead.
Just a moment. An upcoming event, which the planning is not finalized, but we expect it to be Sunday, it will be Reclaiming MLK's Radical Roots. Martin Luther King's Radical Roots, or something close to that, around the time of King's birthday. Sunday, January 25th, 2 to 4 p.m. in the Independent Media Center here in downtown Urbana. And maybe more about this next week, but that's what we're expecting. Do I have a minute to read a paragraph?
Yes.
Okay. This is a quote from a great speech of King's called Beyond Vietnam. That was he gave it a year to the day before he was assassinated. He's speaking against the war in Vietnam, but he says, "But I wish now to go on to say something even more disturbing. The war in Vietnam is but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit, and if we ignore this sobering reality, we will find ourselves organizing clergy and laity-concerned committees for the next generation. They will be concerned about Guatemala and Peru. They will be concerned about Thailand and Cambodia. They will be concerned about Mozambique and South Africa. We will be marching for these and a dozen other names and attending rallies without end, unless there is a significant and profound change in American life and policy."
Now, this is Carl Estabrook for members and friends of Aware, saying in the words of the late Edward Murrow, good night and good luck.